Good morning, gardeners. Welcome to Unity Church-Unitarian's Children's Garden. I'm Anna, and today we are going to be thinking about superheroes. And just think, if there were a plant that could feed itself through photosynthesis, could feed its neighbor plants, could nourish the soil, and gives us food to eat, wouldn't that be a super plant? Something that's worth growing, that everybody would want to grow? I'll bet you would think so. Let us light our chalice this morning, and we will light this for super plants that we're going to learn more about today. And if you'll sing with me now. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Talking about joy, we have our joys and sorrows here. Yellow stones for joys and blue stones for sorrow. I have just come back from a marvelous trip. My husband and I rented an RV and we went all the way through Wyoming, saw incredible landscape, fantastic birds, and just had a great time. Something we much needed in this age of COVID. And yet we stayed away from other people, so it was good, and that was a big joy for me. Don't really have any sorrows today, but I'm very grateful to be here, and I'll give you a chance to think about your own joys and sorrows and do this for a moment at home. Thank you. I wonder if you have guessed what my super plants are. They are actually a group of plants called legumes, and I'm sitting next to our legume bed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But while we think about these super plants, Dan has a story about a super plant, and you'll probably know what it is: Jack and the Beanstalk.
Today's story is Jack and the Beanstalk, a story retold and illustrated by Stephen Kellogg. There was once upon a time a poor widow who had only a son named Jack and a cow named Milky White. And all they had to live on was the milk the cow gave them every morning, which they carried to the market and sold. But one morning, Milky White gave no milk, and they didn't know what to do. "Oh, cheer up, Mother. I'll go and get work somewhere," said Jack. "Oh, we've tried that before and nobody would take you," cried his mother. "We must sell Milky White, and with the money start a shop or something." On his way to market, Jack met a funny-looking old man. "Well, good morning, Jack," said he. "Good morning to you," said Jack, and wondered, how did the man know his name? "Can you tell me how many beans makes 5? said the man. 2 in each hand, and 1 in your mouth," said Jack, sharp as a needle. "Right," said the man, "and as you are such a bright lad, I don't mind doing a swap with you. Your cow for these beans." "Ugh, go along," said Jack. "Ah, but these are magical beans," said the man. "If you plant them tonight, by morning they will grow right up to the sky." "Really?" said Jack. "Yes, and if it doesn't turn out to be true, you can have your cow back." "Back already?" said his mother. "Tell me, How much did you get for Milky White? Oh, you'll never guess, Mother. Could it be 5 pounds? 10? 15? No, she cried. It can't be 20. And where they live, they don't have dollars. They measure their money in pounds. Oh, I knew you couldn't guess. What do you say to these magical beans? Plant them tonight? What? Said Jack's mother. Oh, have you been such a dolt, such an idiot, to give away my Milky White, the best milker in the parish, for a set of paltry beans? Off with you to bed. And as for your precious beans, here they go, out the window. Well, if you know this story, guess what happens? Jack went up to his little room in the attic, and oh, he was sad and sorry. He was sure, and as much for his mother's sake as for the loss of supper, and he dropped off to sleep. When Jack woke up, he saw that the beans had sprung up into a big beanstalk that went up and up and up until it reached the sky. So the old man had spoke the truth. Jack jumped out of bed, out of the house, and climbed onto the beanstalk, and he climbed 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 until at last he reached the sky. Well, Jack walked along and he walked along and he walked along until he came to a great, big, tall house, and on the doorstep was a great, big, tall woman. Good morning, Mum, said Jack. Could you be so kind as to give me some breakfast? It's breakfast you want, is it? Said the great, big, tall woman. It's breakfast you'll be if you don't move on. My man is an ogre, and there's nothing he likes better than broiled boys on toast. Oh, please, Mum, cried Jack. I've had nothing to eat since yesterday morning. Really and truly, Mum, I may as well be broiled as die of hunger. Well, the ogre's wife was not half so bad after all, and she took Jack into the kitchen and gave him some bread and cheese, when all of a sudden, thump, 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 the whole house began to tremble with the noise of someone coming. Goodness gracious me, said the ogre's wife. Come along quick. And she bundled Jack into the oven just as the ogre came in. Well, he was a big one, to be sure. Ah, wife, he said, what's this I smell? Fee, fi, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. Oh, nonsense, dear, said his wife. You're dreaming, or perhaps you smell the scraps of that boy you liked so much for yesterday's dinner. Here you go, and have a wash and tidy up, and by the time you get back, those calves will be broiled for your breakfast. Well, the ogre had his breakfast, and after that he went to the big chest and took out a couple bags of gold, and down he sat and counted, and at last his head began to nod and he began to snore till the whole house shook again. Then Jack crept out of the oven, grabbed a bag of gold, and was off before you could say Jack Robinson. When Jack came to the beanstalk, he threw down the gold, which of course fell into his mother's garden. Then Jack climbed down. Well, Mother, wasn't I right about the beans? They really are magical, you see. So they lived off the bag of gold for some time, but at last they came to the end of it, and Jack made up his mind to try his luck once more up at the top of the beanstalk. And one fine morning he rose up early and jumped onto the beanstalk, and he climbed and climbed, and he climbed, and he walked and he walked and he walked, till at last he came to the great big tall house he had been to before. There, sure enough, standing at the doorstep, was the great big tall woman. "Go away, my boy," said the big tall woman, "or else my man will eat you for breakfast. But aren't you the youngster who came here once before? Do you know that very day my man missed one of his bags of gold?" "That's strange, Mum," said Jack, bold as brass. "I dare say I could tell you something about that, but oh, I am so hungry I can't speak until I've had something to eat." Well, the big, tall woman was so curious, she took him in again. Well, all had happened as before. Thump, thump, thump. They heard the ogre's footsteps, and his wife hid Jack away in the oven. Fee, fi, fo, fum. And after breakfast, the ogre said, "Wife, bring me that hen that lays golden eggs." So she brought it, and the ogre said, "Lay." And it laid an egg all of gold. And soon the ogre began to nod his head and to snore till the house shook. Then Jack tiptoed out of the oven, nabbed the golden hen, and off he petered. Well, by the time the hen gave a cackle that woke the ogre, and just as Jack got out of the house, he heard him roaring, "Wife, wife, what have you done to my golden hen?" When Jack got home, he showed his mother the wonderful hen and said, "Lay" to it, and it laid a golden egg every time he said, "Lay." Well, it wasn't long before Jack decided once again to try his luck at the top of the beanstalk. This time he knew better than to go straight to the ogre's house. When the big, tall woman came out with a pail, he crept into the house and got into the bread box. He hadn't been in there long before he heard the thump, 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 as before, and in came the ogre and his wife. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. I smell him, wife, I smell him. "Ah, do you, dearie?" said the ogre's wife. "Well, if it's that little rogue that stole your gold and the hen, then he's sure to have got in the oven." They both rushed to the oven. But Jack wasn't there, and the ogre's wife said, "Oh, there you are again with your fee, fi, fo, fum. Why, of course it's the boy you caught last night that I've just broiled for your breakfast," she said. "Oh, how forgetful I am, and how careless you are to not know the difference between live and dead after all these years." Well, I could have sworn," muttered the ogre, and he searched the larder and the cupboards and everything, only luckily he didn't think of the bread box. After his breakfast was over, the ogre cried out, "Wife, bring me my golden harp." So she brought it, and he said, "Sing!" And the golden harp sang most beautifully. And it went on singing till the ogre fell asleep and began to snore like thunder. Then Jack lifted the lid very quietly and crept like a mouse on hands and knees till he came to the table, and up he crawled and caught hold of the golden harp. But the harp called out, Master, master, master! And the ogre woke up. Jack ran as fast as he could, and the ogre came rushing after. And when the ogre saw Jack climbing down for dear life, he swung himself onto the beanstalk, which shook under his weight. Down climbed Jack, and after him climbed the ogre, and Jack called out, "Mother, mother, bring me my axe." Jack's mother rushed out with the axe in her hand, and Jack gave a chop at the beanstalk, cutting it in two. Oh, the ogre fell down and broke his crown, and the beanstalk came tumbling after. What with showing the golden harp and selling the golden eggs, Jack and his mother became very rich, and Jack married a great princess, and they all lived happily ever after. And that is the story of Jack and the beanstalk. Ooh, and more beautiful end papers.
You ever wonder how a story like that got started? Well, I think it's because beans are pretty amazing. They are truly super plants. I've got some seeds called scarlet runner beans, and if you look at them, they're kind of a pinkish purple with dark speckles on them, and they're absolutely gorgeous, and they're huge. They're almost an inch long. If someone gave me some seeds like that, I think I'd want to plant them. Probably wouldn't trade a valuable cow for them, but I absolutely would plant them. And then if you plant scarlet runner beans, you need to be prepared to give it some support. Maybe a fence, maybe a trellis, something, because these bean vines get super, super long. Long enough that I think you could imagine them going all the way up in the sky, although they don't actually. That is one kind of bean, and they're pretty amazing because you can eat the stems, you can eat the young shoots and leaves, you can eat the bean pods when they first form. Once the seeds start forming, you can eat them kind of in a soft stage, and you can also cook them dry when they're mature. So this plant feeds us in many, many ways. And it also feeds hummingbirds and bumblebees that like to get in there to that flower. So these are truly amazing, amazing plants. Now in our garden, we don't have scarlet runner beans, but we do have two other kinds of beans, and I'm gonna walk around the garden and show you what we have. On this side, we have an Italian bean called Romano, and they're kind of flat and pretty big. So these are the Romanos, and they're similar to those scarlet runner beans, except half as big, and they are what we call bush beans because they don't get super, super tall. And on the other side, we've got what we call Blue Lake beans, and I'll show you those. They're over here. And some of these have gotten pretty big too. So when you go to pick these, the ideal size is when they're about the size of a pencil or less. And when they get really big and fat, the seeds inside are pretty big, and you might just want to eat these seeds because you can cook those. The pods themselves, when they get this big, they get pretty tough. But we still need to pick them because if you don't, the flowers stop forming. When you harvest beans, you want to look under the leaves. It's a lot like a treasure hunt. And when you lift them up, here is a perfect one right there. This is ideal. And you can take these home, and it just happens that these are ripe at the same time that our garlic is ready to harvest. So I've got a recipe on the parent page for garlicky green beans, and I'll show you how to harvest the garlic in just a minute. So We've got beans on both sides here. We've got some marvelously healthy interplanted potatoes in here. If you come this week, please help us harvest both kinds of beans. We will get those to people who need it, and you certainly should take some home while you're at it. Let's go take a look at the garlic. So once we've got our beans, you need some garlic for that recipe. What I would do is come over here, you find one. The leaves need to be brown, and the stem can still be green, but you do need brown leaves. If I come to the edge here, I'll pull back my mulch that has kept things nice and moist, and I'm going to dig around the base, and I want to be careful not to bruise it. So I come a little bit to the side, and I dig down, and I loosen, and I pull it up, and that's not a bad garlic. Wash it off, chop that up, saute it in a little bit of olive oil, and put your prepared beans in there, and then stir it all around, add a little water and salt to taste, and you've got a wonderful side dish for any dinner. So come to the garden, help us pick some garlic, and help us pick some beans. There'll probably be some squash here when you come as well. Let's take a look at our lawn, because we have another bean plant there. Beans have a very particular flower, and they've got two petals that come like this, and they enclose the male and female parts, and they hold it pretty tight. And it's really hard to get inside there. It takes a pretty stout bumblebee to make it inside there. There are hummingbirds that will work their way through. Beans have a remarkable ability to pollinate themselves as well if they don't get pollinated by insects. But know that most beans have got similar shaped flowers. And if we look at our lawn, you will see little white flowers. We have white clover in our lawn. And what's interesting about this is that way back when my mother was growing up, which would be like your great-grandmother, that generation, it was pretty common to mix clover seed in with the grass seed. Why would they do that? Today, people look at that and say, ah, it's a weed. They put pesticides on it, they pull it, they do all sorts of stuff. Now the farmers know better. They know that clover is one of the best foods for cattle to eat because it's really high in nitrogen. They also know that there's something special happening underground. Clover is one of these amazing things that you could even eat. We harvested some of the flowers, and we're going to make a clover flower tea in just a minute. But let's look at the ground here. I dug up a little bit of clover with my trusty trowel, and if you look closely at the roots, you'll see some little tiny balls down there. They're called nodules, and this is something that all members of the bean family, or the legumes, have, and they're not very big, and inside of those nodules is something even tinier. If you crushed it and looked at it under a microscope, you'd see little specks, and those are bacteria. Now if you thought bacteria were bad, think again, because the vast majority of bacteria are actually very, very helpful. And there's something unique happening underground. Where that clover is, where the bean plants are, the roots go in the ground, and there are some bacteria there that will go into the roots, form those nodules, and then the really amazing thing happens. The plant takes nitrogen from the air, and nitrogen as it exists in the air is not available to the plant, and yet the plant needs that nitrogen to grow, just like our bodies need nitrogen. It's what proteins are made out of. And without that, we wouldn't have strong bodies, and the clover wouldn't be strong, and the beans wouldn't be strong. So the plant gets the nitrogen, and it gives it to the bacteria. The bacteria do a little chemical reaction and turn it literally into a nitrogen fertilizer that helps the clover or the bean plants grow better. And the other thing is, some of that will be left in the soil even after the plant dies. So in the lawn, the clover helps the grass grow better. It was nature's first nitrogen fertilizer. Pretty amazing stuff. The other thing that's interesting to me is that the bean plants, the legumes, the clover, cannot do this on their own. They have to have the bacteria. The bacteria are in the ground, but they can't do it alone. They have to be inside the bean plant. When you have two plants that work together, or two animals, two whatever, and they work together for mutual benefit, scientists call that symbiosis. And it's one of the most wonderful aspects of cooperation that you will find in nature. So we're gonna go over and check our tea. So we have collected a whole bunch of white clover blossoms, and this tea can be made with red clover as well. And I'm going to put it in my fancy teapot. And they are fragrant of pollen and nectar from the garden. And I'm going to pour hot water over the top. Now, a proper tea drinking gentleman from England would not call this a tea, but would call it a tisane or an infusion. But for our purposes, it's a tea. It's an herbal tea. And I'm going to put the lid on it and just let it steep. And when we get ready to drink it, we're going to add a little honey, and we'll have a little tea party in just a little bit. So we've let the teapot steep for a little bit, and it's absolutely beautiful, a little green color. I think we've got some good chlorophyll in there. And I'm going to add a little honey, and then I will invite my friends here to have a little tea. Still quite warm. This is our clover leaf or clover flower tea. And I have 2 teacups, one for Michelle and one for Evie, my dear friends who've helped me in the garden. And of course it's spilling, but if you want some more honey, there it is. I hope that if you decide to pick clover from your lawn, check with the grown-ups and make sure there's no chemicals on it. I know in our church garden we don't use any chemicals, so this was safe to use. Anyway, I hope you come to the garden this week and help us harvest and help us get this food to people who need it, and take some of it home and make some garlicky green beans and maybe even some clover tea. How's the tea, ladies?
Let's see. It's yummy.
Good. Thank you. You're welcome. So I've come back to our chalice. I want us to think about these super plants, just like Superman, like the Marvel comic super people. These are super plants that feed us, they feed the world. If you go in the grocery store, you will find so many different kinds of beans that are specific to different cultures. And it's really fun to see all the different colors and sizes. Beans are really important to our diet, to our culture, to the earth, to the ground. And for that, we give thanks. And I will extinguish this flame. We extinguish the light of the chalice here, but we know that the light of truth and the warmth of love go with us in our heart. Have a great week, everybody.